The official maritime records of 1879 contain a peculiar footnote, one that government authorities have attempted to expunge from history for over a century. Between 1872 and 1878, 27 shipwrecks occurred near Cape Despair, Maine. Of the 143 survivors pulled from these troubled waters, 89 exhibited the same inexplicable symptom: profound selective amnesia, as if specific memories had been surgically extracted from their minds. These survivors could recall their names, histories, and families. Yet none remembered the hours, sometimes days, spent at Cape Despair Lighthouse awaiting rescue. When pressed, their eyes would glaze over, speech would falter, and many experienced sudden, crippling headaches. More disturbing still, several developed identical nightmares featuring a tall figure silhouetted against blinding light, holding what witnesses described as a glass vessel filled with dancing blue luminescence. The Cape Despair Lighthouse, standing sentinel on Maine's most treacherous coastline, was officially decommissioned in November 1878. The government record cites structural instability as the reason, yet the building still stands today, remarkably intact. A stone tower defying both time and the official explanation of its abandonment. More curious still, all records pertaining to the lighthouse's keeper, Ezekiel Thorne, vanished from government archives in 1879 following a classified inquiry whose findings remain sealed in the National Archives. What happened during those 6 years at Cape Despair? What caused dozens of survivors to lose identical portions of their memory? And why would the U.S. Lighthouse Board, an institution dedicated to meticulous record-keeping, destroy all documentation relating to one specific lighthouse keeper? Tonight, we peel back the carefully constructed veneer of official history to reveal the horrifying truth of Cape Despair. A truth that challenges our understanding of both historical science and the depravity possible in isolated places where oversight fails and ambition festers unchecked. If you're brave enough to uncover the secrets that maritime authorities tried to bury for a century, subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching from. What makes this case particularly disturbing isn't merely the horror that occurred within Cape Despair's stone walls, but how conventional scientific inquiry twisted into monstrous experimentation when removed from ethical constraints. Ezekiel Thorne was neither demon nor supernatural entity. He was something far more terrifying, a man of education and respectability whose intellect, when divorced from moral compass, transformed a beacon of safety into an outpost of calculated torment. To understand how such systematic horror could unfold undetected, we must first understand Cape Despair itself, a location seemingly designed by nature for isolation and secrecy. The coastline of Maine in the 1870s remained one of America's most treacherous maritime regions. Its fractured shoreline of granite outcroppings, submerged shoals, and sudden fog banks had claimed hundreds of vessels since colonial times. The particular formation, known as Cape Despair, projected 3 miles into the Atlantic, creating a deceptive current pattern that pulled ships toward its jagged shore during northeastern storms, a geographical trap that had earned it the earlier name the Widowmaker among local fishermen. Located 60 miles from Portland and 27 miles from the nearest settlement of Rockport, Cape Despair occupied a significant gap in the northeastern lighthouse network. The only habitation within visual distance was a small fishing village called Shearwater Cove, population 43, nestled in a protected inlet 3 miles south of the Cape. The post-Civil War period had brought tremendous growth in maritime commerce along the eastern seaboard. This increase in shipping traffic made the gap in navigational aids at Cape Despair increasingly problematic. Between 1865 and 1870, 17 ships were lost on its rocks, with a toll of over 200 lives, a statistic that finally forced congressional action. In 1871, Congress appropriated $43,000 for the construction of a lighthouse at Cape Despair, a substantial sum reflecting both the engineering challenges of the location and its strategic importance to commerce. The project fell under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Lighthouse Board, a military-civilian organization established in 1852 that had professionalized America's system of navigational aids. The lighthouse itself was an engineering marvel, a 74-foot granite tower anchored directly into the Cape's bedrock, designed to withstand the Atlantic's most punishing storms. Adjacent to the tower stood a keeper's house, a two-story structure with living quarters on the upper floor and storage, workshop, and kitchen facilities below. Less visible and critical to later events was an unusual feature included at the insistence of the project's chief engineer, an expanded basement level carved directly into the bedrock, ostensibly to house the complex clockwork mechanism that rotated the lighthouse lens and additional storage for the exceptional quantity of fuel this isolated station would require. This expanded substructure, hidden from casual inspection and not fully documented in public plans, would later provide Ezekiel Thorne with the perfect laboratory for his unspeakable work, invisible to passing ships and unexpected by infrequent visitors. The social geography of the region further enabled isolation. The nearest authority figure resided in Rockport, a journey of nearly 10 hours by horse along poorly maintained coastal roads. The fishing village of Shearwater Cove maintained limited interaction with government officials and harbored a deep-seated distrust of outsiders that Thorne would later exploit to his advantage. Communications technology of the era ensured that Cape Despair remained effectively severed from oversight. The nearest telegraph station was in Rockport, and service inspections from the Lighthouse Board were scheduled only twice annually during the summer months when seas were calmest. During winter storms, when most shipwrecks occurred, the lighthouse keeper operated with complete autonomy, his logs and reports accepted without question by distant bureaucrats in Portland and Washington. Weather patterns completed Cape Despair's isolation. The Cape experienced dense fog an average of 137 days annually, and winter storms regularly rendered the land route impassable for weeks at a time. From November through March, the lighthouse keeper existed in nearly complete isolation, their only contact with the outside world coming in the form of the occasional supply vessel, weather permitting, or the unfortunate survivors of shipwrecks driven onto the Cape's merciless shores. It was into this perfect environment for unobserved experimentation that Ezekiel Thorne arrived in June 1872, carrying with him not only the credentials of a distinguished military surgeon, but also theories about human memory that the medical establishment had rejected as impossible, unethical, and dangerously radical. Ezekiel Thorne arrived at Cape Despair on June 17, 1872, a date that should be marked in the annals of historical infamy. The man who stepped from the supply boat onto the newly constructed dock presented himself as the very model of distinguished public service. Tall and straight-backed, despite his 53 years, with a full beard streaked with gray, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to both respect and obedience. His credentials were impeccable. 22 years as a surgeon in the United States Navy, service distinction during the Mexican-American War, and a letter of commendation from the Secretary of the Navy himself for his medical innovations during the Civil War. This distinguished record, coupled with his public reason for seeking the isolated post, scholarly retirement to complete my medical memoirs, made him appear the ideal candidate to the Lighthouse Board administrators in Portland. What those administrators didn't know, what they couldn't have known without access to sealed military medical records, was that Thorne's departure from naval service had not been entirely voluntary. His official service record showed honorable discharge due to advancing age and personal request. The classified addendum to this record, discovered a century later, revealed a different story. In his final naval posting at Philadelphia Naval Hospital, Thorne had been quietly investigated for experimental procedures exceeding authorized treatment performed on unconscious sailors. Though the investigation was inconclusive, his commanding officer had noted disturbing patterns of patient memory disruption following Dr. Thorne's unsupervised night shifts, an unusual collection of neurological specimens lacking proper documentation. Rather than risk scandal, the Navy had offered Thorne quiet retirement with full pension and recommendations, a decision that unknowingly condemned dozens of future shipwreck survivors to becoming subjects in the doctor's evolving work. More disturbing still were the gaps in Thorne's personal history. Before accepting the lighthouse position, he had resided briefly in Philadelphia with his wife Eleanor and daughter Sophia. Neighbors reported that the family departed suddenly, ostensibly for an extended European tour for Mrs. Thorne's health. Yet no record exists of Eleanor or Sophia Thorne ever boarding a Europe-bound vessel. Their complete disappearance coincided precisely with Ezekiel's application for the lighthouse position. a position typically reserved for married men due to its isolation. Thorne arrived at Cape Despair with an unusual quantity of personal cargo. 16 large crates manifested as medical literature, scientific instruments, and household necessities. The lighthouse supply boat captain, James Woodward, later recalled being struck by the weight of these crates and Thorne's insistence that he alone would unpack them. Most curious was Thorne's explicit instruction that the arrival of these materials should not be mentioned to the Portland Lighthouse authorities, as they represented personal property outside official inventory. Within a week of his arrival, Thorne had established a routine that, on its surface, appeared to reflect model lighthouse keeping. His logs were meticulous, recording weather conditions, lamp operation, and fog signal deployments with military precision. He maintained the brass work and lenses in immaculate condition and submitted reports that satisfied even the most punctilious inspectors during their infrequent visits. Yet from the beginning, there were subtle indications that Ezekiel Thorne was not the straightforward public servant he appeared to be. Frederick Simmons, the assistant keeper initially assigned to Cape Despair, requested transfer after only 3 months, an unusual move that damaged his career prospects. While his official request cited only personal incompatibility with the principal keeper, his private correspondence, preserved by his family, revealed deeper concerns. Dr. Thorne maintains locked rooms in the basement level to which I am denied access, Simmons wrote to his brother in September 1872. When I inquired about strange sounds emerging from these chambers, he informed me that certain lighthouse mechanisms required specialized maintenance that only he was qualified to perform. Last Tuesday, I observed him carrying what appeared to be medical equipment from these rooms after a particularly loud disturbance. When questioned, he flew into a rage disproportionate to my simple inquiry. After Simmons's departure, Thorne successfully petitioned the Lighthouse Board to operate without an assistant, claiming budgetary economy. This administrative decision effectively removed the last potential witness to his daily activities. Thorne quickly established specific patterns of interaction with the nearby village of Shearwater Cove, patterns designed to maximize his privacy while ensuring necessary cooperation. Rather than visiting the village himself, he arranged for monthly deliveries of supplies through Emmanuel Silva, a Portuguese fisherman who spoke limited English. Thorne paid generously for this service, far above standard rates, with the specific condition that Silva alone would handle deliveries and limit his visits to predetermined times. Most calculated was Thorne's approach to shipwrecks, the events that would provide his experimental subjects. Within his first month as keeper, he submitted a detailed protocol to the Lighthouse Board regarding his response to maritime disasters. This protocol emphasized his medical background as uniquely qualifying him to provide first aid to survivors. He specifically requested authorization to temporarily house and treat injured persons until proper transportation to Portland facilities can be arranged, a reasonable and even commendable provision that received immediate approval. This official sanction gave Thorne exactly what he required: legitimate authority to keep survivors at the lighthouse for extended periods without arousing suspicion. The protocol included the establishment of a recovery room in the keeper's house, a facility that existed only on paper. The actual fate of survivors would prove far different. During his first year at Cape Despair, Thorne's external behavior raised no alarms. His logs documented 3 shipwrecks with a total of 17 survivors, all of whom were reported treated for exposure and minor injuries before transportation to Portland. The transportation was indeed provided, but what happened during the intervening days would not be revealed until much later. The doctor's scientific preparations during this initial period were methodical and comprehensive. Through his continuing naval contacts, he ordered specialized equipment, electrical apparatus based on cutting-edge designs from Edison's laboratories, custom glassware from Philadelphia's scientific instrument makers, and chemicals typically used only in advanced medical facilities. Most significant was his extensive correspondence with European researchers working at the fringes of neurological science. Using the lighthouse's official mail pouch, contents never inspected due to his government position, Thorne maintained regular communication with Dr. Heinrich Miller of Vienna, whose controversial work on memory localization in cerebral matter had been rejected by mainstream medical journals but circulated in certain private scientific societies. Thorne's lighthouse logs contained a hidden second text, discovered decades later when chemical analysis revealed entries written in lemon juice that only became visible when heated. These hidden notes documented the evolution of his twisted research methodology during the first year, research conducted not on shipwreck survivors, whom he was still merely observing, but on animals captured from the surrounding wilderness. The mammalian brain appears to release a luminescent substance when subjected to precise electrical stimulation during states of extreme distress, he wrote in October 1872. This luminescence corresponds with apparent memory loss in the subject. Initial collection methods are crude but promising. By the spring of 1873, all elements were in place for Thorne's real work to begin. Institutional protection through his lighthouse board position, physical isolation that prevented oversight, specialized equipment installed in the hidden basement rooms, and a refined methodology developed through animal experimentation. All that remained was to refine his techniques on human subjects, an opportunity the treacherous waters of Cape Despair would soon provide. As one survivor would later write in fragmentary journal entries, struggling against artificially induced amnesia, he stands above, silhouetted against the light, glass containers on shelves, filled with glowing blue liquid. He tells me these are my memories, that I should be honored to contribute to science, that no one will believe me even if I remember. The first documented anomaly in Cape Despair's operation occurred in February 1873, when the merchant vessel Despair Prosperity ran aground during a winter storm. Captain Robert Finley and 6 crewmen survived the wreck, dragging themselves onto the rocky shore, where Ezekiel Thorne discovered them during his morning patrol. According to the lighthouse log, the men were suffering from exposure and minor injuries, and were kept at the lighthouse for 4 days before a supply vessel transported them to Portland. What made this incident notable was Captain Finley's subsequent behavior. A veteran mariner with 30 years' experience, Finley had previously survived 2 shipwrecks and was known for his precise recall of navigational details. Yet upon reaching Portland, Finley could provide no coherent account of his time at Cape Despair. He remembered the wreck and being rescued by a tall man with a gray beard, but the 4 days that followed were completely absent from his memory. More disturbing was Finley's physical condition. The ship's physician documented unusual puncture marks behind the patient's ears, partially concealed by hair, and noted that Finley suffered from recurring headaches of extraordinary severity whenever questioned about his stay at the lighthouse. The pattern repeated with increasing frequency. In April 1873, the fishing vessel St. Catherine broke apart on Cape Despair's rocks during an unexpected squall. 3 survivors were recovered by Thorne, held at the lighthouse for 6 days, and eventually transported to Rockport. All 3 men exhibited identical symptoms: complete amnesia regarding their time at the lighthouse, severe headaches when pressed for details, and unusual scars behind their ears. Emmanuel Silva, the Portuguese fisherman who served as Thorne's supply connection to Shearwater Cove, became the first local resident to harbor suspicions. During a scheduled delivery in June 1873, Silva arrived earlier than expected and observed Thorne carrying what appeared to be medical equipment from the basement to the keeper's quarters. More disturbing was the glimpse Silva caught of a man strapped to a chair inside the keeper's house, a survivor from a recent shipwreck who should have been recovering from exposure, not restrained against his will. The most compelling early witness was Dr. Lawrence Matthews, a physician from Boston, who survived the wreck of the passenger steamer Joshua Eastern Star in September 1873. Unlike previous survivors, Matthews possessed medical training that would later prove crucial to understanding Thorne's activities. Matthews began experiencing what he termed memory flashbacks, fragmentary images and sensations that would surface unexpectedly, particularly during sleep. In his private journal, he documented these fragments. I recall a stone chamber, circular in shape, with apparatus reminiscent of galvanic experimentation equipment. A tall figure moves methodically around what appears to be an operating theater. I am restrained but conscious. There is a sensation of cold metal behind my ear, followed by excruciating pain that seems to pull not at my thoughts themselves. Most disturbing of all is the image of glass containers on shelving around the room, filled with a luminescent blue substance that pulses with a rhythm that seems almost alive. The most significant early warning came from 13-year-old Timothy Wells, son of a lighthouse service inspector who accompanied his father on a routine inspection of Cape Despair in July 1874. Through a basement door keyhole, he observed a chamber filled with strange equipment, glass jars on shelves containing some manner of glowing blue liquid, and what appeared to be medical instruments arranged with surgical precision. When Timothy mentioned this discovery to his father, the inspector dismissed it as childish imagination. However, Thorne's demeanor changed dramatically after the boys' exploration, becoming agitated and insistent that they complete the inspection quickly. By the end of 1874, scattered reports of unusual conditions at Cape Despair had begun to accumulate in various official records, though no single authority possessed enough information to recognize the pattern. Ship captains noted that the lighthouse's signal pattern occasionally deviated from standard protocols during storms. Survivors continued to arrive in Portland and Rockport with identical memory gaps and unexplained medical symptoms. The systematic horrors of Cape Despair might have continued indefinitely had it not been for Assistant Lighthouse Inspector Michael Harrington. Reviewing inspection records in October 1875, Harrington noticed a statistical anomaly. Despite Cape Despair's location in one of the most dangerous stretches of coastline in New England, it reported a significantly higher survival rate for shipwrecks than any comparable station. According to Thorne's meticulous logs, nearly 70% of sailors involved in wrecks near Cape Despair survived the experience, a figure that dramatically exceeded the 30% average for the Maine coastline as a whole. More curious still, these survivors all followed an identical pattern: rescue by Thorne, treatment at the lighthouse for periods ranging from 4 to 12 days, transportation to Portland or Rockport, and subsequent release with clean bills of health. Harrington's suspicions were further aroused when he cross-referenced Thorne's reports with hospital records in Portland. Those records showed that many survivors of Cape Despair shipwrecks sought medical attention for severe headaches, unexplained scars, and memory disturbances weeks or months after their official release. Deviating from standard procedure, Harrington scheduled an unannounced inspection of Cape Despair for November 12, 1875. This decision violated Lighthouse Board policy, which required inspections to be scheduled at least 30 days in advance. The inspection coincided with one of the most severe November storms recorded on the Maine coast in decades. The inspection party reached the lighthouse to find Thorne absent from his post. Inside, they discovered a concealed door in the pantry, leading to a basement level. Using keys from the keeper's desk, Harrington unlocked the heavy door and descended a narrow stone staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. What Harrington and his men discovered in the subterranean chambers constituted one of the most disturbing scenes in the annals of American maritime history. The main basement room had been converted into a surgical theater centered around a heavy chair fitted with restraints for arms, legs, and head. Surrounding this chair was an array of equipment that combined elements of legitimate medical technology with devices of Thorne's own design. Equipment focused on the extraction and preservation of what he termed memory essence. Most horrifying were the shelves lining the circular chamber, filled with glass containers of varying sizes. Each container held a glowing blue-tinted liquid that pulsed with faint luminescence. Each jar was meticulously labeled with a name, date, and what appeared to be a catalog of specific memories. James Sullivan, April 1873, childhood in Boston, naval training, marriage to Elizabeth, or Margaret Collins, August 1874, piano lessons, father's death, wedding day. In an adjacent chamber, Harrington discovered Thorne's research journals, 12 leather-bound volumes documenting the evolution of his experimentation from theoretical concept to refined methodology. The earliest entries outlined his growing conviction that human memory existed as a physical substance within the brain, a substance that could be extracted, preserved, and potentially transferred to another host. Most disturbing of all was the chamber at the lowest level of the basement complex, accessed through a heavy iron door with multiple locks. Inside this final room, Harrington and his men discovered Ezekiel Thorne himself, not as the administrator of horror, but as its latest subject. Thorne was strapped to his own surgical chair, a complex apparatus attached to his skull at multiple points. Around him lay the bodies of 3 shipwreck survivors from the current storm, their skulls showing evidence of the same surgical procedure documented in the journals. Thorne was alive but in a state of extreme distress, babbling incoherently about the final integration and becoming the vessel for all memories. The apparatus attached to his head appeared to be extracting the glowing blue substance from the three victims and attempting to channel it directly into Thorne's brain, a procedure his journals described as the culmination of his research. The direct transfer of memories from one human to another. The procedure had clearly gone catastrophically wrong. Thorne's body was in violent seizure, his eyes rolled back to show only whites, and blood flowed freely from his ears and nose. The inspection team attempted to disconnect the apparatus, but their intervention came too late. Ezekiel Thorne died at 4:18 p.m. on November 12, 1875, his final experiment transforming him from perpetrator to victim of his own twisted methodology. The storm trapped Harrington's team at Cape Despair for 3 days, providing the opportunity to conduct a thorough investigation of Thorne's research. His journals revealed a mind of extraordinary intelligence twisted toward unspeakable ends. His early entries showed a legitimate scientific inquiry, investigating the physical basis of memory and seeking to understand how traumatic experiences were encoded in the brain. The transformation from theoretical research to monstrous experimentation occurred gradually. His first direct experiments on humans, unconscious sailors in the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, had involved crude attempts to stimulate memory centers in the brain using electrical currents. These experiments yielded limited results but convinced Thorne that memory had a physical component that could be manipulated or extracted. His transfer to Cape Despair marked the transition to systematic human experimentation without ethical constraints. The isolation of the lighthouse provided both the necessary privacy and a steady supply of vulnerable subjects in the form of shipwreck survivors. The breakthrough came in March 1873, when Thorne discovered that electrical stimulation of specific brain regions, combined with precise chemical injections, produced what he described as memory illumination, a phenomenon where specific memories became temporarily hyperactive and produced a visible biological response. This response manifested as a faint blue luminescence in the cerebral fluid surrounding the brain tissue, a substance Thorne became convinced was the physical embodiment of memory itself. Using custom-designed instruments, Thorne had developed a method for drawing out the luminescent substance while the subject consciously experienced the targeted memory. Thorne had developed a methodology for selecting memories based on their emotional intensity and personal significance. Childhood experiences, romantic attachments, professional achievements, and traumatic events were preferentially targeted as they produced the most vivid memory essence. Most disturbing was his observation that subjects displayed permanent amnesia regarding the extracted memories, confirming his belief that he had physically removed these experiences from their minds rather than simply copying them. Correspondence found among Thorne's papers revealed his connection to a shadow network of researchers operating outside legitimate scientific institutions. His primary collaborator was Dr. Heinrich Müller of Vienna, whose theories on the physical nature of memory had been rejected by the medical establishment. As Harrington pieced together the operational aspects of Thorne's research, he discovered evidence suggesting that Thorne had begun experimenting with memory transfer between subjects. Notes from early 1875 documented attempts to inject the extracted memory essence from one subject into another, with limited but encouraging results. Test subjects reportedly experienced fragmentary images and sensations from memories that were not their own. Proof, in Thorne's mind, that memory could be physically transferred between individuals. Harrington discovered a hidden ward containing 11 individuals in various states of cognitive impairment. These victims existed in a state of profound disorientation, their personalities effectively destroyed by the extensive removal of formative memories. Thorne's records identified these individuals as complete extractions, subjects whose most significant memories had been entirely removed for his collection. The remaining victims, according to journal entries, had died during aggressive extraction procedures or had been used in failed memory transfer experiments. Thorne had disposed of these bodies at sea during night operations, a total of 17 individuals whose disappearances would be attributed to drowning during the original shipwrecks. As the storm subsided, Harrington dispatched an emergency message to Portland requesting medical assistance and government intervention. Within 24 hours, Cape Despair would become the focus of a classified operation that would forever alter the official record of what had transpired within its stone walls. Within hours of Harrington's message reaching Portland, a specialized government team was dispatched to Cape Despair. This team, identified in classified documents only as the Maritime Incident Assessment Unit, arrived on November 16, 1875, aboard the naval vessel USS Resolute. Led by Colonel James Blackwood, a veteran of Army intelligence with no previous connection to the lighthouse service, the unit effectively took control of the scene from Harrington and his men. Harrington's detailed report, submitted to his superiors at the Lighthouse Board, described the transfer of authority. Upon arrival, Colonel Blackwood presented documents bearing the seal of the Secretary of the Navy, granting his team complete jurisdiction over the Cape Despair situation. My objections regarding the medical needs of the surviving victims were dismissed, and I was informed that specialized medical personnel would attend to them. Within hours, my team and I were removed from the lighthouse and returned to Portland with explicit orders not to discuss what we had witnessed with anyone. What followed was one of the most comprehensive cover-up operations in American maritime history. For 6 weeks, Cape Despair Lighthouse remained officially closed for structural repairs, while Blackwood's team methodically documented, categorized, and ultimately removed all evidence of Thorne's experiments. The 11 surviving victims were transported to an undisclosed government facility, ostensibly for treatment, but no record of their eventual fate exists in public archives. The official investigation, documented in heavily redacted files declassified a century later, focused primarily on containment rather than justice. The classification, potentially disruptive to public order and maritime confidence, appeared repeatedly in internal communications between Blackwood and his superiors in Washington. This designation, typically reserved for matters of national security, allowed the government to suppress all information about the case under the guise of protecting public welfare. Harrington, the whistleblower whose integrity had uncovered the horrors, found himself effectively silenced through bureaucratic means. Within weeks of his return to Portland, he was reassigned to a desk position in the Lighthouse Board's Washington office, a nominal promotion that removed him from field operations and placed him under direct supervision of officials connected to the cover-up. His personal journals, discovered after his death in 1892, reveal his frustration. They have buried the truth as effectively as Thorne buried his victims at sea. My reports have vanished from official records. My witnesses have been scattered to distant postings, and I myself am kept where they can monitor my every communication. The victims of Cape Despair have been twice violated, first by Thorne's unspeakable experiments, and now by a government that values order above justice. The only partial justice came in the form of a covert international operation targeting Thorne's network of collaborators. Dr. Heinrich Müller of Vienna mysteriously disappeared in December 1875, his laboratory destroyed in what was officially recorded as an accidental fire. Similar fates befell 2 other European researchers connected to Thorne's correspondence. These operations, conducted without public acknowledgement, effectively dismantled the scientific network that had supported and encouraged Thorne's work. Most disturbing was the fate of Thorne's research materials. While his equipment was destroyed and the lighthouse facilities sterilized of all evidence, his journals and extracted memory essence samples disappeared into government custody. Classified memoranda from early 1876 reference the transfer of these materials to a facility identified only as Site 7, where analysis of experimental findings will continue under appropriate ethical oversight. The implication was clear. The government, while condemning Thorne's methods, saw potential value in his discoveries. Cape Despair Lighthouse was officially decommissioned in November 1878, 3 years after Harrington's discovery. The official record cited structural instability as the reason, though engineering reports from the original construction confirmed the facility's sound design. Local maritime charts were redrawn to route shipping traffic away from the area, effectively isolating the Cape from casual visitation. The physical structure itself was left standing, too solid to be easily demolished, too remote to require removal. Over the following decades, it became a silent sentinel on the Maine coast, avoided by local fishermen who passed down vague warnings about the bad lighthouse without specific knowledge of why it should be feared. The survivors of Thorne's experiments, who had been released before his death, approximately 50 individuals scattered throughout New England, continued to suffer the consequences of his work for decades. These victims, living with partial memory extraction and no understanding of what had been done to them, experienced lifelong symptoms that baffled conventional medicine: chronic headaches, unexplained neurological issues, and persistent gaps in their personal histories that caused profound psychological distress. Dr. Lawrence Matthews, the physician who had survived the Eastern Star wreck and experienced fragmentary recall of his time at Cape Despair, devoted the remainder of his life to studying these survivors. Working without government support or academic recognition, Matthews documented consistent patterns among Thorne's victims, patterns that would later prove crucial to understanding the full scope of the Cape Despair atrocities. His monograph on persistent amnesia following maritime trauma, privately published in 1884, contained veiled references to Thorne's work that escaped government censorship precisely because they appeared to be theoretical rather than documentary. The truth about Cape Despair remained buried in classified archives until November 12, 1975, exactly 100 years after Harrington's discovery. On that date, the Centennial Review of Historical Records Act automatically declassified thousands of 19th century government documents, including a substantial portion of the Cape Despair files. Even then, approximately 30% of the documentation remained sealed under extended classification orders, suggesting the continued sensitivity of Thorne's research a century after his death. Historian Margaret Holloway, researching lighthouse operations for what she expected to be a conventional academic study, became the first civilian to access these declassified files. Her subsequent book, The Keeper's Dark Work: Memory Experimentation and Government Secrecy at Cape Despair, published in 1977 against significant political pressure, revealed the outlines of the case to a public that had never suspected such horrors could exist within a trusted government institution. Holloway's work faced immediate challenges from authorities who claimed she had misinterpreted standard medical procedures of the era and sensationalized routine quarantine measures common during shipwreck responses. These official rebuttals, however, crumbled under scholarly scrutiny as additional documents emerged through Freedom of Information Act requests filed by multiple academic institutions. The most disturbing revelation came in 1978 when construction workers renovating the basement of a government medical facility in Maryland discovered a sealed vault containing what appeared to be the last remaining samples of Thorne's memory essence collection. These specimens, still faintly luminescent after a century in storage, were immediately confiscated by federal authorities and removed to an undisclosed location. The workers who discovered them reported being required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements and undergoing security debriefing procedures typically reserved for matters of national defense. The Cape Despair case raises profound questions about institutional accountability and the ethical boundaries of scientific inquiry. How could one man's obsession evolve into systematic atrocity without effective oversight? What responsibility does society bear when its structures of authority prioritize secrecy over justice? Most troubling of all, what became of the knowledge extracted from Thorne's victims, both those who died under his procedures and those who lived on with portions of their humanity surgically removed? The lighthouse still stands today, neither restored nor demolished, a gray stone tower on a remote headland that few visitors seek out. Those who do report a peculiar quality to the site, an unnatural silence broken only by the rhythmic crashing of waves, an absence of the seabirds that populate similar coastal formations, and what some describe as a subtle blue luminescence visible through the tower's windows on particularly dark nights. In 2018, neurologist Dr. Eleanor Chen published a study noting statistical anomalies in memory-related disorders among residents of coastal Maine communities surrounding Cape Despair. Her research identified a pattern of inherited memory disruption, neurological conditions appearing in descendants of shipwreck survivors who had been treated at the lighthouse. These descendants, with no possible direct exposure to Thorne's experiments, nevertheless exhibited symptoms consistent with targeted memory extraction, including highly specific amnesias and dream patterns featuring blue light and circular stone chambers. This transgenerational effect, impossible within conventional understanding of neurological trauma, suggests that Thorne's work may have altered something more fundamental than individual memories, something capable of transmitting across generations through mechanisms science is only beginning to comprehend. Dr. Chen's research was discontinued after her grant funding was unexpectedly terminated following a routine federal review. The story of Cape Despair stands as warning of what becomes possible when scientific curiosity operates without ethical constraint, when isolation removes the protective oversight of community, and when institutions value secrecy above accountability. Ezekiel Thorne was neither supernatural monster nor incomprehensible madman. He was something far more terrifying, a man of intelligence and education who methodically transformed a beacon of safety into an outpost of calculated horror. The true tragedy lies not only in what occurred within those stone walls, but in how effectively the truth was suppressed by the very institutions entrusted with public protection. 150 years later, we must ask ourselves what other buried histories might still lie hidden in government archives. What other atrocities have been classified as potentially disruptive to public order? And what other victims still wait for acknowledgement and justice? As you drive along the coastal highway tonight, consider the remote lighthouses you might glimpse on distant headlands. They stand as symbols of protection and safety, but the story of Cape Despair reminds us that even our most trusted institutions can harbor darkness when oversight fails and secrecy prevails. Some lights are meant to warn ships away from danger, others perhaps to lure them toward fates worse than drowning.